Hey guys, my name is McGann, and if you're new here, I have spent most of my life in a vortex of narcissists. So I consider myself the narcissist whisperer because I've just really become familiar, way too uncomfortably familiar, in fact, with the moves and tactics and behaviors of people who have things like narcissism. And I will agree that the term is getting really interchangeable with things like being a jerk or abusive in general. So I'm gonna try to break myself of the habit of saying narcissist, but unfortunately, narcissism are terms that people know and they don't always know how to decipher into narcissistic personality disorder. But today, I want to take a break from talking about narcissists and narcissism and sort of slide over into an avoidant attachment style, which can be associated with narcissism. Now, if you watch my videos regularly, you probably saw in Am I the A-hole video asking about this guy I was dating and the situation, and I spent a big lead-in of that video explaining my relationship before that and why that kind of shaped me to being paranoid about the current relationship that I was in. And as always, I am not a doctor. I do not have any ability to diagnose someone, so this is all speculative, anecdotal, educational purposes sort of thing. But I did date someone for about 6 months who checked all of the boxes for the avoidant attachment style. And someone who has an avoidant attachment style is the type of person who wants a relationship, but then they kind of feel like smothered by it and they don't want it anymore. So it's like, come closer, get away, come closer, get away, come closer, get away. And it's very frustrating both for the person who is an avoidant and the person who is trying to have a relationship with an avoidant. And I'm unfortunately someone who has anxious, preoccupied attachment style, which means I tend to want to be really clingy with my partner. So the more they run, the more I tend to chase, and it just turns into this really bad game of cat and mouse. So before we get into the story time portion of this, let me go over what an avoidant attachment style looks like. And this is according to medicalnewstoday.com. People with this attachment style will avoid emotional closeness in relationships. So again, they kind of want a relationship, but they don't at the same time. It's all going to be on their terms. It has to be exactly what they want it to be. Otherwise, they don't really mind to drop you like a bad habit. They feel as though their partners are being clingy when they simply want to get emotionally closer. And that was a big issue that I had, was it was like, okay, we've been dating for so long, like, let me know you better. And he was always like, no, stay back there. We don't need to get any closer whatsoever. They withdraw and cope with difficult situations alone. They suppress their emotions. So even if they feel like I love you or I hate you or this is the best person I know or I really don't like them, you often will not be able to tell because they have a really good poker face. They often avoid complaining, preferring to sulk and hint at what is wrong. They suppress negative memories. And I don't know if I like the wording for that, but I definitely could see some of that in the person I was dating because he would be like, oh, my dad cheated on my mom, and like that was the emotional depth of which he would get into that subject. Like he completely was cut off from it otherwise. And even though he acted like it didn't bother him, he had no real relationship with his dad. I mean, even on Father's Day, he was just like, yeah, I don't talk to him. And that was that. Like there was no further discussion on that topic. They withdraw or tune out from unpleasant conversations or sights. I constantly had that issue where I would try to talk to him and get him to open up or define what we were doing, and he was just like, nope. And if I could get him in one of those difficult conversations, it would often be hours, if not a day, before he would talk to me again. They fear rejection. They have a strong sense of independence. They have feelings of high self-esteem while having a negative view of others. And I didn't see that one hugely in the guy I was seeing, but there were a lot of critical things and opinions that would kind of slip out here and there. Like, I don't think he had the narcissistic superiority complex, but you could see a little hint of it. And they can be overly focused on their own needs and comforts, which means they could care less about you and yours. Okay, so now that we have a little bit clearer of an understanding on what an avoidant attachment style looks like, let me go into the story time for the 6-ish months that I was dating this dude. I'm just going to call him Tony for the sake of, having something to call him. But I met Tony through a dating app. He was one of very few who came at me with these very long, deep walls of text. And I was into that. It gave me something to read. It gave me something to respond to. It was so much better than the what you doing kind of messages. Like, I hate those. I don't even bother with those a lot of the time. And I get it when you are on dating sites and you might be matching with dozens to hundreds of people, you might not be able to start some giant conversation with each person. But if you see a window of opportunity with someone on there where you share a lot of commonalities and you don't put in the effort at that point, I mean, not having a good match is on you. So we were chatting for a long time and the conversation was phenomenal. But looking at his profile pictures, it was just kind of like, I don't know, the physical attraction is not really there for me. He is really like a skin and bones type of guy and I'm a really curvy girl. It just didn't look like a good physical match. But I had multiple friends tell me, just go out on a date, give him a chance, see where it goes, see if you guys click in person better, because his pictures might not do him any justice. And I will say the 4-part series I did on dating a vulnerable narcissist was happening as I met this new guy. Like, the vulnerable narcissist would break up with me, and then I met Tony, and then the vulnerable narcissist would come back and convince me to give him another chance, so then I wasn't responding to Tony. So it took probably 2-ish months of conversing through the dating app before we finally set a date to physically meet, because I just had to get that other guy, out of the picture, out of my system, and kind of be in a good place to have a date with someone else. And granted, I know it doesn't sound like I'm giving myself any rebound time, but the vulnerable narcissist thing only lasted for about 6 weeks. This wasn't some huge whirlwind romance where I was devastated by the loss of him. It was like, man, this guy was crazy and he was messing with my head. Okay, time to move on. So anyways, crazy guy's out of the picture. I am going out with Tony. We go to this barcade where they have like pinball machines and arcade machines and liquor, and we actually have a really, really good time. And this guy's getting so lovey-dovey and affectionate and overwhelming me with compliments. And he has this job where he often travels out of town to do construction projects. So he's like texting me all day, every day, these really long messages. And it felt really great. We went on a few more dates, everything was fine, and then, and I feel so weird about saying this, but in the interest of honest, full disclosure here, we ended up meeting in a hotel room to have our first romantic encounter together. And, he paid for the whole thing. He was very sweet, bought me dinner, everything. It was a great time. And at that point, we had been dating for roughly a month. We'd been out on multiple dates. It didn't feel rushed or pressured at all. But the strange thing was, here's a man in his 30s. He says he lives alone with a roommate. And at one point, we were kind of talking about like, well, we can't come here to do the deed because I have kids. And he said, well, we could come to my place, but we have to be really, really quiet because of my roommate. And then Tony ended up settling on this idea of, well, I'm going to get us a hotel room because I feel like I'm going to want to remember our first time for a very long time. So I want it to be special. Like, oh. And I really don't know exactly what went wrong to this day, but it's like as soon as we got up for breakfast the next day, he was a completely different person. It's like he wasn't really mean, but, we're saying goodbye. I'm giving him a kiss. I'm saying, I hope to see you again soon. And he's like, yeah, definitely. We'll do this again sometime. And then once he drives away, he's really not texting me anymore when he was always like, bloop, 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 all day, every day. So that was weird. And then his vibe towards me really shifted after we left the hotel. And it wasn't like he was ghosting me because he'd always respond to me. And, if I wasn't saying anything to him, eventually he would say something to me. But it was like all of the sugar, honey, sweetie, you're so wonderful compliments just stopped. It wasn't like they tapered down, they just completely ended. And then a lot of the attention he was giving me dried up, and it was just sort of like, hold on, what's going on? Like, how do I get this back? What happened? Like, what went wrong? And unfortunately, as someone who is an anxious attachment style, I kind of blame myself for it. So, I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to fix it. And the more I wanted to talk about, what's going on here, the more Tony was like, oh, I don't like this conversation. Oh, this is stressing me out. And after a few months, I think once we got to about the 3-month mark, we were seeing each other really sporadically. He just kind of had this "I'll see you when I see you" attitude to him now. And I was like, what are we? Like, are we boyfriend, girlfriend? Like, what are we doing? Because this feels weird. It feels like you're pulling away. I don't know what's going on. And he basically came in with this long conversation of, well, I like you. I just don't like labels. So I don't want to be your boyfriend. I just want us to date like we're in high school, like steady, like exclusive. And I thought about it and I'm like, well, he's basically telling me that he wants to be my boyfriend, but just not use the term boyfriend. So, okay, we'll try this out for a while. Guess who that eventually drove crazy? And the really frustrating thing was when we had the big, long text conversation of what are we doing? Like, on the one hand, I did get some very good in-depth conversation out of him. Like, I understood what he wanted and where he was coming from better. But on the other hand, it was almost like I was punished for it in a way, because it was like his affections dried up even more and he was irritated that he had to have the conversation with me. And so, like I said, he would go hours and hours and hours without texting me now. And it was just like, what's going on? And I mean, we would be in the middle of a back and forth, ping, 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 ping text conversation, a perfectly nice one, nothing stressful. And then he would just stop responding, which would send me into a spiral. And he'd come back hours later and go, oh, sorry, I was using my phone for music. Like, you couldn't have sent me a little message that, you weren't going to have your phone handy. I mean, we were in the middle of talking to each other. And there were other things that came up that were really weird. Like, before we met in person, he was like, well, I'm not afraid of a phone call. If you want to call, we can call and talk on the phone too. And then afterwards, when I'm trying to develop a better emotional connection with him, he's just like, I don't like phone calls. I only take phone calls from my mother. Or early on, he would talk about me meeting his mother, and then that seemed to be completely off the table. Even with the roommate thing, at one point before we got busy, he was telling me how we could potentially use his apartment, but we had to be conscious of his roommate, which was fine if that was the situation that we needed to go with. But after we left the hotel, the entire idea of ever going into his apartment was abruptly taken off the table. And the really weird part of it is that I picked him up at his house for multiple dates and events, and he would always just run outside and get in the car. He would never let me come in. And then the custody with my ex started getting a little better worked out, so I was having 2 weekends a month with nobody there. And more or less, that's when Tony would come over. He would show up after work, so he would get to my house at about 6 o'clock. He would shower, we'd eat. We'd never go out to eat, really. We would always pretty much, I'd cook something in the house. Then we'd go to my room, do whatever, watch a movie till we fell asleep, play video games, whatever thing that we were going to do. And as soon as he woke up the next day on Saturday morning, he was out the door and gone. Like, that was his limit. He didn't want to be around me anymore, and it was weird. And I just remember constantly feeling so hurt and kind of out of control in this situation. Like, here's this guy, I've gotten pretty attached to him, we've got a romantic connection, we are dating, even though we're not boyfriend-girlfriend after all this time, and he's treating me like I'm his dirty little secret, and I don't like that. And there was one day that he mentioned going to see his mom for her birthday, and I was like, oh, well, I would say tell her happy birthday from me, but I know she probably doesn't know who I am. And he's like, no, she knows about you. And I'm just like, why does your mother know about me if we're not even a real couple? Like, it was so confusing. And I never got the impression that Tony was married or seeing somebody else or anything like that. I think he was legitimately single the entire time, and he just did not want me to cross any threshold that would bring me into his real life. So it was very hurtful and frustrating for me because I was very clear from the beginning that, hey, I've spent most of my adult life being married. I don't know that I necessarily want to be married again right away, but that is kind of the goal for me, is that's my comfortable space. That's where I know how to exist. So a serious relationship is what I'm looking for. And he seemed to be on the same page until we got to that hotel room, and then all of a sudden we weren't anymore. And I also don't think that it was just about us hooking up for him, like him getting that kind of a gratification, because we kept dating for months after that. But it really felt like if I leaned into the relationship, he would lean way out. And if I would get frustrated and start giving up on it, then he would lean in. But when I was like, okay, this is what I want, I'm leaning back in too, he would lean right back out. And it made me insane. And just the general lack of interest in me got to be really hurtful. We went from having these long conversations to just like hi, how are you? I'm doing good, working on anything neat today, and he might send me pictures of a project he was doing or something like that, but I would really have to kind of stomp my feet before he would invite me out on an actual date and not just want to like come over for a few hours to my house, show up, spend the night, leave as soon as he could in the morning kind of a thing. He had no desire to meet my children. We were actually in a video game store together, and while we were in line checking out, my son walked in, who's a teenager. He has his own license, so he just walks into the store, and I just look over and very loudly go, "Oh, it's my son!" And Tony's standing behind me. He gets out of the line and kind of hides so that there is no risk of him having to ever interact with my kid. And I mean, it's one thing, you don't want somebody to meet your kid too quickly, but it's also like, this is a situation that just happened, and he didn't even say hello or introduce himself as my friend or anything. It was just really weird. And there were times that we went to like toy shows and video game conventions and things like that, and I would cross paths with people I knew, and they would say hello, and Tony would just keep walking and just wait halfway down the aisle for me to be done saying hello. Like, he wouldn't stand with me, he wouldn't meet anybody, and that was very hurtful to me. In fact, there was one point where I mentioned something about my parents, and he got all tense about it and said something to the effect of, "Well, I'm really afraid that you're going to ask me to meet them." And it was just like, dude, we've been dating for like 5 months at this point. Do you feel like you're never going to have to meet my family? But yeah, that's basically exactly what he wanted. He just wanted to date and casually hook up and be exclusive, but not give me anything that I want or need out of the relationship anymore. And so it got to the point where instead of trying to address the problem, because I kept trying over and over and over again, I had enough people in my ear going, "Listen, honey, this casually exclusive thing does not make sense. It does not work for you. It does not serve you. So go find some other dates and see if Tony ups his game. Like, if you are dating multiple other guys, then you won't be so emotionally invested in Tony, and he will either shape up or he will ship out because you'll have better options." So I go back on these dating sites with the intent of, finding a filler boyfriend-esque person. I ended up finding somebody that I liked better. And so for a while, I'm dating 2 guys at once, just hating myself every minute of the, process of this. But the thing is, the new guy knew about Tony. Tony did not know about the other guy. Because again, in my head, I was waiting for the sweet, charming, romantic Tony to magically pop back into the scene, sweep me off my feet, and I would ditch new guy. And actually, I got to the point where I decided I wanted to focus on the new guy more than Joe. And I know it sounds contradictory to the story I'm telling you, but I was slowly letting go of Joe while also kind of being like, I don't want to let go of this relationship either, because that triggers negative things in me. But I knew that the new guy I had started seeing, like, he was a much better fit, a much better option. We had been seeing each other for about 3-4 weeks before he invited me to his house where he lived with his brother at that time. And he's introducing me to people as his girlfriend, as the person he is courting. So it wasn't like, "Oh, this is McGann, she's some chick I'm seeing," or, I don't even get to be involved at all because he doesn't want those 2 facets of his life to intermingle. So it didn't take long for me to see that, like, yeah, new guy is the direction for me to go. I was just having a very difficult time letting go of Tony at the, same interval. Like, I knew Tony and I were in a dead relationship headed to nowhere, but I still didn't want to watch that flower wither on the vine at the same time. And also, side note, new guy and I have gotten to the 7-month mark at this point, so we're actually doing really well. And I can't even fully verbalize how much of a day and night difference it is between new guy and Tony. Because at 6 months in with Tony, you know, I had met none of his people. I had very little interaction with him, no phone calls, no regular dates. It was just whenever he felt like seeing me, that's when he saw me. Whenever he felt like texting me, that's when he'd text me. And again, Tony was never mean about anything. It was just a very casual vibe that wasn't for me. Like, casually exclusive was a bad fit for me. And then we have a new guy who is just like, hey, come to my new apartment, spend the night. I want you to come over. I want to do this with you. I want to do that with you. Hey, I came to your play. I met your kids. He was going at this relationship sort of charging almost a little bit too fast in some areas, but he wanted to make it very clear that he was serious. And when we ran into problems, when new guy and I ran into problems, it was kind of jaw-dropping for me because they'd be issues that I would expect to be explosive or to end the relationship. And instead, he would kind of pull back and get quiet and then be like, okay, I've done that thing you wanted, or I thought about it and you're right, so I fixed it. And again, it's just a completely different vibe, and I am so happy. I feel so lucky to have him. And that doesn't mean that it's always easy or that we never have communication issues, because like I said, we had a lot of communication issues early on, but he is there and resolved to work things out in a way that Tony definitely was not. Tony was like a fair weather guy to date, and new guy is like future husband material, if that makes sense. So there can be silver linings and happy endings here if you hang on long enough. Kiss enough toads and you will find a prince. But Tony and I ended up getting into this little squabble because I was directing a play and he refused to come see it because he would have to meet and interact with people that I knew. So he didn't want to come see it, even though he was a huge fan of the subject material. And that frustrated me so much that we got in this big kind of fight over that. And he talked about wanting to break up then, and for some reason I was like, I really don't want to break up. Like, I want things to go back to where they were several months ago. However, I did clarify that as much as I want our relationship to go back to where it started, I cannot do that by myself. And he's like, no, I understand. You're not in this relationship alone. I will pull my weight and do my part too. And then, you know, less than another month, maybe 2.5 to 3 weeks later, he just wasn't doing anything different. He wasn't making room for me in his life. He wasn't making time for me. He wasn't calling. He wasn't texting me more. He was putting in zero effort compared to what he was doing a couple weeks before. So I ended up having this little meltdown text on him, and I'm like, I am so confused with you. Like, I don't understand you. I don't understand what you want. You say that we're on the same page, and then things don't happen. I don't even know if you want kids or not. And he took about a solid day before he responded to me, and he's just like, I'm not opposed to having children, but I would have to think really hard before I brought more into the world with somebody who already had children. Which, what? This is news to me. I didn't know that there was some secret bitterness about me having kids. And essentially what he said boiled down to, I realize I am not meeting your needs, but you are not worth the effort to do anything any differently. And as harsh as that sounded, we did end things very amicably. And it was a hard conversation. I was crying. I was upset. We went back and forth quite a few times, just sort of getting all of the emotions out there. But it was strange because I felt like, okay, this is the conversation that is an end of the line conversation. We are probably never going to speak to each other again. And then the very next morning, he is texting me like almost like nothing happened. The only thing that was different was that I didn't get the kissy face emoji in the text. So for several days to weeks, we went on texting kind of business as usual. We ended up going to a toy convention together and shopping around that day. And then I had not physically seen him since that happened. But after that toy convention, our conversations kind of got farther and farther and farther apart. And I think the last thing that I sent him was about 2 weeks ago, and I had asked him about a video game that we were previously talking about months ago, Stray, and wondering if he had gotten it yet, if he recommended it, because it was on sale right now and I was interested in it, but he just really didn't seem like he was wanting to talk to me. So I assume he's found somebody new on the dating site that he's infatuated with, and now it's like no time for me, which is fine. It's fine. I think, honestly, the way things tapered down in our relationship, where he wasn't just gone like that, and we really sort of, I don't even know a good comparison, we sort of rolled that car into the river ditch, like in a very slow, natural-ish progression, and so it really didn't hurt to lose him. I mean, the day we broke up hurt. I called friends and cried about it and vented about it. But at the end of the day, it's like I had all the closure I could ever ask for. And he was still kind of around. The next day he was still texting me. So it really served me well to have this sort of good, friendly breakup. And again, even now, there is no animosity between Tony and I. He is just probably pursuing somebody else. And I have gotten more serious with the person that I started, seeing at the same time I was seeing him. So I think overall things worked out really well because I found a person that actually did seem to meld and want the same things I wanted. And we've been doing pretty great. Well, that's a lie. Okay, we've had quite a few bumps in the road, but a lot of them have been misunderstandings because he often thinks he's communicating well when he's not. And I often think that I'm being very clear and direct when I'm not. So we've had communication issues overall, but we've got what feels like a really good, solid foundation. So again, things worked out well. It is really one of the only relationships I can think of ending in a romantic sense that it didn't, have some, oh, I hate him, I could never talk to him again, I can't believe he did this to me, sort of negative feelings. And it wasn't that, we ended things on a great note, because obviously I went through 6 months of being sort of misled by this guy who said he wanted a relationship that he didn't want. But in a lot of ways, he took accountability for that. He said, I thought I could do this. It turns out that this is not what I wanted after all. And I hate that I had to be that guinea pig, but he also didn't string me around for months or years and blame everything on me and be really crappy about it either. So I think that's kind of the big difference for me in an avoidant attachment style versus a narcissist, is that even though they have kind of that same, I'm gonna tunnel up and you can't get to me, you can't get through my walls kind of behavior, the avoidant doesn't aim to hurt you or punish you or get off on doing those things like a narcissist does. And I will say, I think Tony is a perfectly good guy. He just wasn't meant to be my guy. And maybe he's not meant to be anybody's guy, but he seemed to be sweet. He was emotional. He was fairly caring, even though it wasn't to the extent or levels that I needed to feel cared about. So yeah, that's to all the people saying like, how can you only date narcissists? I can't believe all the people you date are narcissists. No, that's just usually the only people I talk about. And here we have an example, a great example with Tony, that I do date people other than narcissists. Well, I think I've gone into about as much detail as I can right now. Unlike the vulnerable narcissist that I dated, I didn't have to sit down and type out all these extensive notes of all these horrible things that he did to me. And I mean, yeah, there were things that Tony lied about. He told me pretty early on that he does smoke, but he's trying to quit. And then clearly he was not trying to quit at any point after that. But it just felt in a much more humanistic kind of way, if that makes sense. It didn't feel like it had a nasty ulterior motive or that he was trying to gain something. He was just a guy that thought he wanted a relationship that he really couldn't handle. And instead of wanting to work it out or make it better, he just preferred to give up. And so, I moved on to better things. Sorry, I feel like this video is kind of a little disconjointed because I didn't take notes before I sat down to record this, but I wanted to get this out while it was still in my head before I totally lose all memories of Tony. So I'll end this here, say thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, share. Let me know if you have ever dated somebody who is an avoidant and how they treated you. And other than that, I guess we will see you whenever the next video comes out. Thanks for watching, guys, and remember, doesn't really fit here, but it's kind of my closer, so I'll use it. Always put yourself first, because a narcissist will always put themselves first. And I guess that applies for avoidance too. Take care of yourself before you worry about somebody else in the relationship. Just like on a plane, if those airbags drop, you have to put on your own mask first before you help the person next to you. Take care of yourselves, guys.